Good day, beloved. I'm glad that you joined me for today's message. There are moments in Scripture that feel like a doorway, not just a passage, not just a teaching, but an actual doorway into the life God always intended for His people. And when Paul continues this conversation in 2 Corinthians 3, it's as if he swings that door wide open and invites us to step into something brighter, something weightier, something deeply alive. This is where I want to invite you today, because the topic before us, you are our epistle. It isn't simply a theological idea. It is the breathtaking reality of what the Spirit of God is doing inside us. And when Paul moves into verses 6 through 18, he begins speaking with the kind of boldness that only comes when someone has tasted the life of the Spirit and can't keep quiet about it anymore. Paul says God made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant, and the moment he says that, everything turns. He isn't saying we made ourselves sufficient. He isn't saying we qualified ourselves by effort or discipline or some dazzling religious performance. No, God made us sufficient. God qualifies. God equips. God breathes life. And suddenly the whole conversation shifts from the heavy weight of human striving to the bright, unstoppable life of the Spirit. And maybe that's where we need to begin today, with this relief that comes washing over the soul whenever you finally understand that you don't live this Christian life by the sweat of your brow. You live it by the breath of His Spirit. What a difference that makes. It turns faith from a burden into a living flame. Paul says, the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Not because the letter, the law, was evil or broken or unnecessary, but because the law was always intended to bring us to the point of seeing our insufficiency so we might finally welcome His sufficiency. Even the glory of the law and Moses' shining face is proof that there was real glory there, even that glory had an expiration date. Not because it was fake, but because something greater was coming, something that doesn't fade, something that doesn't end, something that doesn't need a veil. And that's where this passage becomes deeply personal. Paul is saying, look, what Moses carried was glorious, but what you carry is far more glorious. The ministry of the Spirit surpasses the ministry of the law, just as the sunrise surpasses the flicker of a candle. And we hear this today not as observers reading dusty history, but as people who are called to walk in the same Spirit who overshadowed Moses, who empowered the prophets, who raised Jesus from the dead, and who birthed the very church we belong to. I want you to imagine Moses descending that mountain, his skin lit with reflected glory. The people trembled. They couldn't even look at him. He had to wear a veil because their hearts couldn't handle it. And Paul says, if that glory was too intense for the natural human heart, how do you explain the glory of the Spirit now dwelling inside believers? Not a fading glory, not a reflected glory, not a borrowed glory, a glory that transforms, a glory that indwells, a glory that remains. Oh, how Wigglesworth leaned into this truth, that the Spirit is not decoration, not a theological idea, not a symbolic dove hovering over our doctrine, but the living breath of God producing holiness, desire, joy, righteousness, and divine liberty right inside our very bones. And so Paul begins speaking boldly. You can almost feel the fire in him. Since we have such hope, he says, and hope always lifts the voice, we use great boldness of speech. This boldness did not come from personality. It came from revelation. When the Spirit unveils your heart, boldness is no longer a personality trait. It becomes the natural response of someone who has seen something too wonderful to whisper about. But then Paul explains why this revelation matters. Because without Christ, the veil remains. Without Jesus, Scripture stays closed. Without the Spirit, the law remains unread in its true meaning. He says that veil is still there when Moses is read, still lying across the human heart, until something happens, something simple yet profound. When one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. What a statement! Turning to the Lord lifts the veil. Turning to the Lord opens the eyes. Turning to the Lord awakens the heart. Turning to the Lord gives access to the very glory we were designed for. And then Paul says one of the most liberating sentences in all of Scripture. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. This liberty is not the freedom to do whatever we want. No, it is the freedom to become what we were created to be. It is the freedom from the old bondage, the old fears, the old sin patterns, the old condemnation, the old striving. It is the freedom of someone who finally realizes, I no longer live under the burden of do. I live in the delight of His will, His will, His will. This is where Wigglesworth spoke with almost childlike joy. He would say, it's no longer thou shalt not, it is I will because I delight in God's will. And when that delight settles into the heart, oh, how the Christian life changes. Suddenly holiness is not a task, obedience is not a duty, righteousness is not a performance, sanctification is not a burden, it becomes a joy. This is what Paul means when he speaks of the ministry of righteousness being far more glorious than the ministry of condemnation. Condemnation came with commands carved into stone, righteousness comes with Christ shaping the heart from within. Oh, the beauty of righteousness! There is nothing quite like it. It clothes the soul with a purity that cannot be faked. It gives the inner life such integrity, such clarity, such peace. It restores what sin distorted. And Wigglesworth understood righteousness not merely as moral correctness, but as the very atmosphere of Christ, the fragrance of His life dwelling within us. He said if Christ spoke it, it stood fast. His righteousness was not shaky. His word did not wobble. And if Jesus is the truth, then to be transformed into His image is to be shaped into people of truth. People whose yes means yes. People who don't exaggerate spiritual experiences. People who don't inflate numbers to impress crowds. People who are the same inside and out, pure gold through and through, even if sliced open. Righteousness, when it fills a person, creates a consistency that reflects Christ. It makes our words reliable. It makes our inner life peaceful. It gives us authority in prayer because Scripture says, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence toward God. And oh, how many believers experience prayer as a struggle simply because the heart remains divided, cluttered, or inconsistent. But when righteousness settles in the heart, the righteousness that comes from Christ, not from striving, prayer becomes as natural as breathing. Wigglesworth used to say that the life of Christ swallows the life of the flesh. Divine immortality swallows natural mortality. It's the Spirit lifting us above the old tendencies, the irritations, the temper, the old ways creeping up. He would smile and say, I will never be cross any more, not as a boast, but as the joyful declaration of someone who had discovered what walking in the Spirit truly meant. Because when you walk in the Spirit, the old life doesn't keep reappearing like a weed popping through cracked pavement. No, the Spirit plants something new, something living, something that grows with the warmth of God's presence. This is why Paul ends this passage in such a breathtaking way. He says, we behold the glory of the Lord not from afar, not through a veil, not through a prophet, but with unveiled faces, as though looking into a mirror. And in beholding Him, we are being transformed, not in one dramatic leap, not in a single moment, but from glory to glory. It's the Spirit's work. It's a steady work. It's a progressive work. It's a beautiful work. And what He begins, He continues. What He continues, He perfects. What He perfects, He sustains. This is the excellent glory, the glory that excels, the glory that remains, the glory that writes the very life of Christ onto our hearts so that we truly become the epistle Paul speaks of, living letters, carrying the fragrance of Jesus into every place we go. And beloved, this is where the Spirit is leading us even now. And so when Paul says, we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, he is showing us something profoundly relational. We are not transformed by straining. We are not transformed by self-releasing. We are not transformed by guilt or shame or religious anxiety. We are transformed by beholding, by seeing Him, looking at Him, learning Him, walking with Him, welcoming Him. It's a transformation born from relationship, not regulation. And this is why the Spirit has come to unveil, to reveal, to illuminate Christ to the human heart until everything inside us is changed. Wigglesworth often emphasized that the Spirit's work is inward before it is outward. The glory begins within, and from there it radiates. He would say that God doesn't place His holiness as an ornament on the shelf of the soul. He pours His holiness into the very bloodstream of the new nature. It becomes part of who you are, not merely what you do. And when holiness settles into the heart like this, your desires begin to shift. What you once resisted, you now delight in. What you once tolerated, you now refuse. What once bound you, you now walk away from with spiritual ease. This is the liberty Paul speaks of, the liberty of a heart that is finally aligned with God. When you look at Moses wearing that veil, you see two things. The glory was real, and the people weren't ready. But when you look at the Spirit's work in us today, you see something even more astounding. The glory is greater, and God Himself has made us ready. The veil is gone, the access is open, and the relationship is personal. But here is where the passage becomes extremely practical. If the Spirit brings liberty, why do so many believers feel bound? Why do so many still wrestle, still fall, still feel powerless? Paul's answer is found in the simplest phrase: when one turns to the Lord. Turning, that is the beginning of liberty. Not turning halfway, not glancing, not checking in occasionally. Turning, the full orientation of the heart in His direction. Wigglesworth used to say that some people want God to fill a cup they never empty. They want God to speak to a heart they never quiet. They want the Spirit's power while still clinging to the old self. But the life of the Spirit requires a turning toward the Lord so complete that the veil finally lifts, the eyes finally open, and the transformation finally becomes possible. In the ministry of condemnation, the law, everything was external: rules, stones, commands, boundaries. But in the ministry of righteousness, the Spirit, everything is internal: desire, joy, power, purity, a new will, a new delight, a new nature. This is why Paul says the glory of the new covenant is greater. It is glory that works its way from the inside out, weaving Christ's own life into our character. And oh, how deeply this matters, because righteousness is not merely moral correctness. It is the clear, steady alignment of the heart with God so that the soul becomes a trustworthy vessel of His presence. Wigglesworth would often mention how important it is to be people who mean what we say, who never exaggerate God's works, who never manipulate emotions, who never bend truth for the sake of impression. He would say, if they cut you open, they must find gold through and through. That is righteousness. That is Christlikeness. That is the work of the Spirit. Jesus was true inwardly and outwardly. He was integrity embodied. He carried no double life, no hidden agenda, no conflicting nature. His righteousness was not something He performed. It was something He was. And when Paul says we are transformed into the same image, from glory to glory, he is revealing the Spirit's intention for every believer, that Christ's character becomes our character, not by imitation alone, but by impartation, the Spirit shaping us until we resemble the one we behold. And oh, what a wonder this is, that God would take people who once lived in the shadows of the old life and usher them into the brightness of His Son. That God would take natural weaknesses and weave divine strength through them. That God would take hearts once bound by sin and teach them how to delight in holiness. That God would place His own righteousness inside us and call us epistles, living letters, known and read by all men. You see, your righteousness is beautiful because it is relational. It brings us into harmony with God. It gives power to our prayers. It gives weight to our words. It creates trust in the community of believers. It gives testimony to those outside. And it gives the Spirit a vessel He can flow through without obstruction. Wigglesworth described righteousness as the ministry Christ modeled after His resurrection. Those 40 days where he spoke with infallible truth. He was showing the disciples what righteousness looks like in action. Clarity, power, consistency, truth, purity, unwavering authority. And when the Spirit comes upon us, he begins producing the same qualities, one layer at a time, one glory to the next. But notice something else Paul says. If the glory Moses carried faded, but the glory we carry remains, then our responsibility is not to produce the glory, but to maintain the beholding. The glory does not fade because the Spirit does not fade. But believers can stop beholding, stop turning, stop yielding, stop listening. And when that happens, transformation slows, stagnates, and sometimes even reverses. But when the face stays turned toward Christ, transformation continues. When the heart stays open, change becomes inevitable. When the Spirit is given full liberty, the old life loses its power. This is the rhythm of glory to glory, not a leap but a journey, not a sprint but a steady progression, as the Spirit works gently, thoroughly, faithfully, day by day. Wigglesworth lived in that awareness, waking each day with the expectation that God would reveal more of himself, change more within him, use him more deeply. He saw no reason why the believers should live on yesterday's experiences. There is fresh glory today, fresh transformation today, fresh liberty today. This is the ministry of the Spirit. And beloved, this is also why holiness is not something we strain for, it is something we receive. When the Spirit fills the heart, the will itself becomes softened and aligned. The desires become purified. Emotions become sanctified. You no longer try to be holy, you are carried into holiness by the one who dwells within you. I delight to do your will, O my God, not I fear, not I struggle, not I endure, but I delight. This delight is the mark of the Spirit's liberty. It is the evidence of an unveiled heart. It is the fruit of a life transformed from the inside out. This is why Paul says the ministry of righteousness exceeds much more in glory. It is a greater glory because it produces a greater change. It is a greater glory because it reveals a greater Christ. It is a greater glory because it rests not on human effort but divine life. And it is a greater glory because it lasts, it remains, it does not fade. The Spirit has not come merely to polish our behavior. He has come to reproduce the life of Christ within us. He has come to make us living epistles. He has come to write the story of God's grace across the canvas of our lives until those who see us can read Him in our character. This is why it matters how we speak, how we live, how we behave when no one is watching. This is why exaggeration matters. This is why truth matters. This is why prayer must flow from a clear heart, because righteousness is the vessel through which the Spirit flows freely. Beloved, when you live with unveiled face, when you behold Him, you cannot remain the same. The Spirit will keep changing you, shaping you, correcting you, strengthening you, purifying you, not condemning you, transforming you. And the beauty of this transformation is that it is not mechanical, it is relational. It is the fruit of seeing Him. This is why the gospel is not about achieving perfection in a day. It is about yielding daily. And as you yield, the Spirit takes you from one degree of glory to another, weaving Christ's image into your soul until something unmistakable begins to shine through you, the glory that remains. This is the glory the world needs to see, not the glory of human strength, not the glory of religious performance, not the glory of outward show, but the glory of Christ reflected in ordinary people who have turned to the Lord with unveiled hearts. And so today, I want you to see that you are not called to strive, you are called to behold. You are not called to manufacture righteousness, you are called to receive it. You are not called to create glory, you are called to carry it. And as you do, the Spirit will write upon your heart the very life of Christ until you become a living letter of His grace. That is the ministry of the Spirit. That is the excellence of glory. That is the life God intends for us. And if this message has stirred something in you, if it has awakened your hunger for the Spirit's transforming work, If it has reminded you of the beauty of righteousness or the liberty of the unveiled heart, then let it bless someone else too. Beloved, don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that Christ is still transforming hearts, still lifting veils, still bringing liberty, and still changing lives from glory to glory.